Mechanically, 100%. So bodies, I like it.
Yeah.
I've just got too many little things sitting around. We're not using them, driving them.
Picture the heavy equipment business the way most people imagine it. Shiny dealership lots, rows of brand new excavators wrapped in plastic, salesmen in polo shirts talking financing plans and extended warranties. That's the world nearly every major dealer in America chased for the last 3 decades. Bigger machines, bigger margins, bigger franchises. But in a quiet corner of southern Indiana, a man named Clinton Chitwood looked at that entire industry and decided to walk in the opposite direction. He wasn't chasing what was new. He was chasing what everyone else had already thrown away. And somehow, that decision turned into one of the most respected names in used and rebuilt heavy machinery, and one of the most watched equipment channels on the internet. This is the story of CNC Equipment, and the one stubborn idea that changed everything. Long before there was a company, there was just a farm kid in Monroe County, Indiana, growing up surrounded by machinery that most people would call scrap. His father worked in excavating, so bulldozers, backhoes, and dump trucks weren't distant, mysterious objects. They were part of the daily scenery, the same way a barn or a pickup truck might be for another family. Clinton learned early that a machine wasn't something you threw away the moment it broke down. It was something you fixed. You diagnosed the problem, you found the part, or you made the part, and you got it running again. That mindset, equipment as something to be maintained and repaired rather than replaced, would end up shaping every decision he made for the next 2 decades. It's worth remembering that this wasn't the direction the rest of the industry was heading. By the time Clinton was old enough to be running his own operation, the heavy equipment world had already started shifting hard toward newer machines loaded with computers, sensors, and emissions technology. Dealerships for the big manufacturers, the Caterpillars, the John Deeres, the Komatsus, and Cases of the world, were built around selling the newest models, backed by financing packages and factory warranties. That was where the money was. That was where growth was. Nobody was building a business plan around 40-year-old military surplus trucks. Nobody, that is, except Clinton Chitwood. In 2004, Clinton founded CNC Equipment. There was no venture capital, no group of investors, no 5-year plan to build a national chain. It started the way thousands of small equipment businesses start across the rural Midwest: buy used machines, fix what's broken, sell them to farmers and contractors who need something that works without breaking the bank. On paper, there was nothing special about it. If you'd driven past the property in those early years, you might not have given it a second look. It looked like just another modest equipment yard, one of hundreds scattered across small-town America, buying and flipping used iron to keep the lights on. For a while, that's exactly what it was. Nothing separated CNC from its neighbors. Had things gone differently, this could easily have stayed a small regional operation known only to local contractors and farmers who needed a reliable used loader or a decent skid steer. But somewhere around 2008, Clinton made a decision that a lot of people in the industry would have called reckless. He started buying decommissioned military surplus vehicles. To understand why this was such an unusual move, you have to understand what military surplus actually meant at the time. These weren't ordinary used trucks that a construction company traded in after a few years of light duty. These were vehicles that had spent years, sometimes decades, in active military service, hauling troops, ammunition, and supplies through conditions that would destroy most commercial equipment. When a Department of Defense decided a vehicle was no longer needed, it went through a disposal process. First offered to other federal agencies, then to state and local governments, and only if nobody claimed it, released into public surplus auctions. By the time these machines reached a private buyer, they often carried a strange contradiction. On the outside, they looked rough: faded paint, dented panels, torn seats, sometimes rust creeping through the frame. But underneath that beat-up exterior often sat a drivetrain built to a completely different standard than anything you'd find on a civilian lot. The classic deuce-and-a-half cargo trucks, the heavier 5-ton haulers, early Humvees, generators, forklifts, engineering trucks, all of it had been engineered for one purpose: keep running no matter what. Deserts, mountains, freezing cold, deep mud. Military specifications didn't allow for a truck that quit when things got difficult. Breakdowns weren't just inconvenient in that world. They could be dangerous. So these machines were overbuilt on purpose. Heavy frames, simple mechanical systems, parts that could be swapped and repaired without a laptop or a dealership. That same ruggedness, though, was also exactly why most buyers avoided them. They were slow. They weren't comfortable. Driving one on a public highway took some getting used to, and plenty of them had never been designed with civilian roads in mind at all. Most equipment dealers looked at a lineup of surplus trucks and saw a headache. Clinton looked at the same lineup and saw an opportunity that almost nobody else was willing to take seriously. Here's the part that really set CNC apart. Clinton didn't just clean these trucks up and resell them as is. He rebuilt them. Crew cab conversions to add seating. Upgraded suspensions to smooth out the ride. Custom steering setups to make them more maneuverable. Entire fabrication projects to solve problems that didn't have an off-the-shelf answer. Because there was no off-the-shelf for a 40-year-old military truck. If a part didn't exist anymore, his shop made it. This is where the CNC plasma table earned its place as one of the most valuable tools on the property. Not the biggest excavator, not the flashiest crane, but a machine that could cut precise steel components straight from raw plate. Combined with welding and machining equipment, it meant CNC wasn't dependent on a parts catalog that might not carry what an old truck needed anymore. If a bracket didn't exist, they built one. If a mount had rusted through and the part was discontinued, they engineered a replacement from scratch. Every job that came through the shop became a kind of one-off engineering puzzle, and solving those puzzles built a level of in-house skill that most competitors simply didn't have. None of this was easy money. Buying military surplus and turning it into something a civilian customer could actually use took mechanical knowledge, patience, and a willingness to get elbow deep in machines other people had already written off. But every successful rebuild added to a growing reputation. This was a shop that could tackle projects other dealers wouldn't even attempt. If a surplus truck decision was the first turning point for CNC, the second one happened almost by accident. In October of 2012, the company uploaded its first YouTube video. There was no production crew, no script, no marketing strategy behind it, just a camera pointed at the work that was already happening in the shop. And that, in its own quiet way, turned out to be just as unconventional as the military truck idea. Most equipment dealers at the time relied on polished advertising, clean photos, upbeat descriptions, the kind of marketing that makes every machine sound like a great deal. Clinton did the opposite. He showed equipment exactly as it arrived, rust, leaks, cracked welds, and all, instead of 30-second highlight reels. His videos often ran 40 minutes or longer. Viewers followed him through muddy auction lots, watched him climb into bulldozers nobody else wanted to touch, and listened as he explained, piece by piece, what made a machine worth buying, or worth walking away from. That willingness to be critical, even about equipment he could have profited from selling, became the defining trait of the channel. He'd point out a cracked frame, a leaking final drive, a suspiciously fresh coat of paint clearly meant to hide corrosion underneath. Sometimes he'd walk away from an auction machine entirely and explain exactly why it wasn't worth the risk. Viewers started to realize this wasn't a sales pitch. It was an education. Clinton wasn't trying to convince people that everything was a bargain. He was teaching them how to evaluate equipment the way an experienced buyer would, which, ironically, made people trust him more than any glossy ad campaign ever could have. That same honesty extended into a much bigger problem that was creeping into the industry: online equipment fraud. As buying and selling heavy machinery moved onto the internet through the 2010s, so did scammers. Fake dealer websites started popping up, using stolen photos from legitimate auction houses, listing equipment that didn't exist, and pressuring buyers into wiring large deposits before anyone had a chance to verify anything. Some of those buyers lost tens of thousands of dollars, in some cases far more, chasing a machine that was never real to begin with. Industry groups and equipment registries repeatedly warned buyers about these schemes, but warnings only go so far. Clinton took it a step further and started breaking down real examples on camera: fake websites, mismatched pricing, recycled photos showing up under different company names, and the classic pressure tactics used to rush a buyer into sending money before they could think it through. He told people to verify physical addresses, ask for serial numbers, confirm ownership independently, and never let urgency override common sense. There's something almost ironic about it. By teaching people how to spot dishonest dealers, Clinton also made it easier for them to evaluate honest ones, including his own company. But that's exactly the kind of trade-off that built trust. He wasn't hiding behind a curated image. He was actively helping people protect themselves, even when it meant giving away information that made his own sales process more transparent and therefore more scrutinized. While CNC leaned harder into rebuilding, the rest of the heavy equipment world was moving in the opposite direction. Starting in the late 1990s and picking up speed through the 2000s, manufacturers poured money into cleaner diesel engines, onboard computers, electronic controls, and increasingly complex emission systems, largely driven by tightening EPA regulations. The machines that came out of that shift were quieter, more powerful, and more efficient, but they were also dramatically harder to work on. Diagnosing a modern engine increasingly required specialized software and dealer-authorized tools. If something went wrong, in many cases only the manufacturer's own technicians could actually fix it. That shift is part of what fueled the broader right-to-repair debate that's played out across farming and construction equipment for years now. Farmers and independent mechanics argued that owning a machine should include the practical ability to maintain it. Manufacturers pushed back, citing safety, emissions compliance, and protection of their own technology. That argument eventually worked its way into courtrooms and legislatures, with companies like John Deere becoming a central example in the controversy after years of public pressure and legal challenges over repair access. Clinton never positioned himself as an activist in that fight. He didn't lobby lawmakers or organize protests. But everything CNC built pointed toward the same underlying idea. Equipment that an owner can actually understand and repair with common tools has real value. Sometimes more value than a newer machine that looks better on paper, but becomes useless the moment something breaks in a place without a service center nearby. He wasn't arguing that modern technology was bad. He was asking a more practical question. Does the added complexity actually serve the person using the machine, or does it just create more ways for that machine to become unusable when it matters most? By the time CNC's YouTube audience had grown into the millions of monthly views, the company was sitting on an opportunity that a lot of business owners would have jumped at immediately. Requests were coming in from customers far outside Indiana, other states, other countries. The internet had erased the old limitations of a small regional dealer. This was the moment where the obvious playbook says, expand, open new locations, hire regional managers, scale the brand nationally, maybe even internationally. Clinton and his wife Bridget did the opposite. They chose to keep the business tightly controlled rather than spread it thin across new locations. Clinton has talked openly about the reasoning behind that choice. Every new location means more managers, more layers of oversight, and more distance between the people making decisions and the people doing the actual work. Quality gets harder to protect. Communication slows down. Decisions that used to happen on the shop floor start getting buried in meetings and reports instead. That's a genuinely unusual stance in American business, where growth is treated almost as a moral obligation. More locations, more market share, more scale, seen as proof of success. Choosing to stay smaller on purpose arguably takes more discipline than chasing expansion, because it means turning down opportunities that most companies would never say no to. But for CNC, staying lean meant the fabrication, the welding, the machining, the customization, all of it stayed under one roof, done by people who could be trusted to hold the same standard on every single job. That consistency became part of the product itself. The growing overseas interest in CNC's work wasn't random, either. A lot of the customers reaching out from places like remote parts of Africa, Australia, and Alaska had one thing in common. They were operating far from any dealer network, in places where waiting weeks for a specialized part simply wasn't an option. For them, a rugged mechanical engine that a local mechanic could actually diagnose and repair was worth more than the latest electronic system that required a laptop and a factory technician to even read an error code. Clinton had essentially built a business around solving a problem these buyers had been living with for years, long before most of the industry ever acknowledged it existed. What's easy to miss looking at CNC equipment now is that almost none of its growth came from traditional marketing. There was no influencer playbook, no manufactured drama, no exaggerated reactions designed to farm views. People kept coming back because they expected honesty, even when that honesty wasn't flattering to the equipment, or occasionally, to CNC itself. That kind of trust doesn't get built overnight, and it definitely doesn't get built by telling people everything is great all the time. Alongside the equipment work, the company also became known locally in Brown County, Indiana, for supporting community charities, emergency services, and events benefiting children, a detail that fits the same overall pattern. A business built around showing up consistently rather than chasing headlines. Step back and look at the full arc of the story, and the through line is pretty clear. In an industry where nearly everyone measured success by how fast a company could scale and how new the equipment on the lot was, Clinton Chitwood built something almost entirely on the opposite set of values. Machines that could be repaired instead of replaced, transparency instead of polished marketing, and a business kept small and controlled instead of stretched thin across new locations. None of it looked like a safe bet at the time. Buying military surplus nobody wanted, posting hour-long videos with no editing polish, walking away from sales instead of pushing them, turning down expansion when the door was wide open. Every one of those decisions ran against what the rest of the industry was doing. And yet, put together, they're exactly what built CNC equipment's reputation. Not the newest machines, not the biggest footprint, just a shop in southern Indiana that decided the machines everyone else gave up on were worth a second look, and turned that idea into something the rest of the heavy equipment world eventually had to pay attention to. That's the story of CNC equipment. Proof that sometimes the biggest change in an industry doesn't come from chasing what's new. It comes from someone stubborn enough to bet on what everyone else already threw away.